Hey everybody, this is your professor, Aaron Rosari. Welcome back to another exciting video on biomedical ethics, healthcare ethics and law. So this week we covered, I think, one of the more, I don't know how difficult it was for you, but a little more abstract maybe than some of our material will be. We talked about the nature of what is called moral standing, and then we went. I think that was the part I'm thinking might have been a little tricky. The rest I think is pretty straightforward, the different definitions of brain death and that sort of thing. So I've posted a written version of the content of this video. So if you prefer to just read instead of watch, I've posted my own responses to the reading questions. And I only ask if you skip this video, you go read those carefully, compare what's there to what you have written, make notes, improvements. You don't have to resubmit to me. You'll get credit as long as you did a thorough job to begin with. But yeah, this kind of replaces the lecture. So either going through my written responses or going through this video, and then you'll be ready to address the questions on the discussion board. Okay, so this is going to be pretty low tech again. I'm just going to put my typed answers to the questions on screen, and I'm going to talk through them a little bit and just kind of give some extra explanatory detail. Okay, so let me share. All right. So I think a good way to proceed here, obviously, if you want to read it yourself, you could do that. So I think I will this time go ahead and read these things out loud. And yeah, all right. So question number one, this is all based on chapter 3, the basis of moral standing and debates on defining death, abortion, stem cells, and animal welfare. All right, so we begin. Read the introductory passage on pages 37 to 39. I note that whenever you come across a term in bold print, this means that term is defined in the key concepts section at the end of the chapter. Uh, so I give you 3 definitions to kind of go track down. Having an understanding or just at least knowing the definitions as you proceed through the chapter will definitely increase comprehension. So the first term we defined were stem cells, and these are cells that are found in multicellular organisms that are unspecialized and capable of renewing themselves. So under certain conditions, they can become tissue or organ-specific cells. So for example, the body contains skin cells, it contains brain cells, it contains heart cells. A stem cell is an undifferentiated cell. It hasn't been told or hasn't turned into a more specific type of cell. This makes them pretty suitable for various therapeutic interventions. Uh, when injected into the body in certain sites, for example, they can simply become a more specific type of cell, like a blood cell. Uh, this definition mentions that they're capable of renewing themselves. What actually happens is if you put some stem cells into a petri dish, they'll keep dividing and keep producing more and more cells. So even when the original stem cells die out, they create what is called an eternal stem cell line. And I give some additional commentary here. In biomedical ethics, it is the embryonic stem cells that cause controversy. A recently fertilized zygote, it's just a sperm and an egg getting together, is composed completely of stem cells, and they are often harvested for therapeutic use, and this kills the embryo. So embryonic stem cell research, that's where the controversy lies. It raises some of the same pro-life, pro-choice issues that abortion raises. Okay, so what do we mean by the moral standing of a person or an animal? The status of humans and other beings who have moral claims on others or to whom others have duties. All right, so when you're asking about the moral status, let's say, of a squirrel. So this is in my little commentary. Actually, let me read the commentary and then I'll say a little more. So here's my commentary on this concept. Uh, for example, consider a rock you might find in the forest. That would have no moral standing. If you were to break it in half, you would be doing nothing wrong. You don't owe any obligations. You don't have any obligations to the rock. You don't owe the rock anything. If you think about why that is, it's pretty clear. The rock's not conscious. So there's no sense in which the rock cares what happens to it. So there's no reason for you to care what happens to that rock. So it has no moral standing. Nothing's at stake in terms of the health, well-being of the rock. Okay. If you A squirrel has some moral standing, as even though it is morally permissible to hunt and eat them, it's wrong to torture them. So we do owe something to the squirrel. We owe it to the squirrel not to deliberately cause it pain, just for our own enjoyment, for example. I don't know how significant that is, but it is something we owe to the squirrel. A human has full moral standing, which means a human has robust rights that entail a human should be free from many types of ill treatment. And also, we also have some positive claims on each other. So take like a public healthcare system. If we have a right to such healthcare, such a system, that implies we, as members of the same society, we not only owe it to one another to not harm one another, we owe it to one another uh, to take care of each other to some degree. Okay. So your moral standing is kind of like the degree to which other beings have responsibilities towards you, and moral responsibilities often kind of cluster around either not harming someone else or positively benefiting them in some way. Okay, and as this definition shows, moral standing can come in degrees. Okay, and then there's actually two definitions of a person. I should probably rewrite the question. Uh, there's person that's used in a moral sense, or there's a moral use of the word person, and that's a human or other being that has full moral standing. So let me illustrate this. You've probably seen the movie E.T. Most people have. E.T. is this very sensitive and intelligent alien, and literally from another planet. But he's like humans in that he has reason, he has consciousness, he has feeling, he understands, the basic gist of morality itself. Uh, so E.T. is a moral agent. So he's a person, even though he's not human, in the moral sense. So the drama in the movie is the government wants to do tests on ET, and that's clearly unethical because ET has moral standing. All right, there's also a non-moral use of person that it's purely what's called descriptive. So humans and other beings who possess some critical or essential mental capacities, such as self-consciousness or rationality, those are also referred to as persons. Now, we'll interact more with this distinction a couple questions below so we can kind of move on. Okay, so the next major subheading is persons, humans, and individuals, the language of moral standing on page 39. This question applies to the first subheading, the concept of moral standing. A person, creature, or habitat has some degree of moral standing if we have a duty to either benefit that thing, known as a duty of beneficence, or if we have a duty to avoid harming it in various ways, and those are duties of non-maleficence. And again, a little bit of a helpful repeat. Not all beings have the same level of moral standing. In the second to last paragraph of this section on page 40, a couple of illustrations of this are given. One is of a rabbit having less moral standing than a human child, and another one's of a bobcat. And I basically ask you to kind of describe those. So let's just address those together. They're pretty much the same idea. Um, so we want to make sense of the idea that a child, human child, has a higher level of moral standing than either a rabbit or a bobcat. This is easy to illustrate. Just imagine that you have a pet rabbit and a daughter, and your house catches fire, and you only have time to rescue one or the other. You could ask yourself, well, what one should I rescue? It's clearly your child. So that's one way to make sense of comparative levels of moral standing. One owes more to a human child than a rabbit. And this is revealed in this kind of scenario where you can only rescue one or the other. You have an obligation to rescue the child. And the same thing applies if you're comparing a child to a bobcat. So, for example, let's say a bobcat's about to eat a child, and you could stop it only by harming the bobcat or killing the bobcat. That would be the ethical thing to do. All right. Now, question 2C says, just go ahead and explain full moral standing. This is actually a little tricky, so maybe I should have given you a little more guidance here. So here's what I wrote. Full moral standing is a tricky notion to define, but it's actually easy to illustrate. Adult humans have moral rights not to be killed, to not be deliberately harmed by others, and to be free to make decisions for themselves. We must take each other's interests into account when we act. No other species on this planet has a stronger claim to have their interests taken into account than a human being. Hence, full means something like highest level in comparison to other species. So, with a human being, we owe each other all the basic forms of respect, kindness, reciprocality. Uh, just think of the basic morality that we kind of mapped out during that first week. We owe that to each other. And then as you go and interact with other species, uh, we owe them a little less. So if I see a deer starving in the woods, I don't owe it to that deer to feed the deer. But if I see a child starving in the street, I kind of do owe it to the child to at least get it to a shelter or call someone or do something to intervene. So that's the idea behind moral standing. Full moral standing comes in degrees. Okay. Now there's a section entitled, this next part I just labeled commentary, put one too many M's there. This commentary concerns the section entitled Moral and Descriptive Uses of the Term Person on pages 40 to 43. This section might strike you as a little vague. Basically, what the authors are trying to do is describe how the use of the term person relates to the use of the term moral standing in the bioethics literature. Their main point is that this literature can be confusing because not everyone uses this terminology in the same way. So I asked you to simply read these passages with this commentary in mind. Here is kind of a recap of this section on pages 40 to 43. Point A, sometimes person is used simply to describe a being that has certain characteristics. The most common ones are self-awareness and some degree of rationality expressed as an ability to solve complex problems and think and communicate using language. When person is used merely to pick out that someone has these personal traits, no assumption is being made about whether or not that person has moral standing. But sometimes person is used to pick out all beings that have moral standing. On this use, even a being who could not yet think, be self-aware, or problem solve is referred to as a person. Hence, a pro-life defender might insist that an early-stage fetus or an adult with severe dementia is a person in order to make it clear that they have full moral rights. Okay, so points A and B, that's all that's really being, that distinction is all that's being made on pages 40 to 43. So with this in mind, let's go to question 3, which is a direct application of these points. So the question 3 concerns the section entitled Confusion Resulting from Shifting from a Non-Moral to a Moral Use of the Term Person. The indented paragraph contains a pro-choice argument on pages 42 to 43. What does persons mean the first time it is used in the argument? What does person mean in the second use? Does this shift in meaning invalidate the argument? Okay, so the first time person is used, so let me just go to that, page 42, 43. So let me read through it. And if you have your book handy, go ahead and look at it. So here's the argument. Late-term fetuses are not persons because they lack self-awareness or self-consciousness or the ability to reason. That's premise 1. But since lacking personhood means one lacks full moral standing, fetuses can be aborted. So here's the problem with the argument. The first time person is used in this argument, it is used in a non-moral sense. So when it says late-term fetuses are not persons because they lack self-awareness, the idea there is we're just describing what a person is. It's a person who has self-awareness or perhaps the ability to reason, and we're just simply saying the fetus lacks that. So the claim made is that a late-term fetus is not rational or self-aware. Now, the second time person is used, it means someone who has full moral rights. So the person offering the argument is basically saying that those who are not persons in the non-moral sense are not persons in the moral sense either. In other words, only self-conscious and rational beings have full moral understanding. That's the idea behind that. The author's criticism of this argument, this is part C here, is that the one making it owes us an argument that only persons in the non-moral sense have full moral standing. This is asserted in the argument, but needs to be defended. Hence, the argument is not a good one, as a key idea is not defended. So what you can't do is just say, okay, look, a late stage, even a later stage fetus is not a person in the sense that it lacks self-awareness or consciousness. It doesn't automatically follow that they lack full human rights or full moral rights or have full moral standing, the terminology we've been going with. That itself needs an argument. So that's the basic idea there. Okay, now we are going to do a section on abortion, and I believe there's a really famous article defending abortion where this move is criticized. It's called Marianne Warren's argument or article, A Defense of Abortion. We're not going to cover that specific article, but we will do more work on the questions surrounding abortion. And maybe we can apply this point there. Okay, now Um, I give a little more commentary. I say, read the section entitled Moral and Non-Moral Uses of the Word Human on pages 43 through 44. Similar points are made about descriptive versus moral uses of the term human. The basic point is that sometimes human refers to a being that is genetically human, like a recently fertilized egg or zygote. Other time, human carries the connotation that the being has full moral standing. And all the author points out is you can't slide back and forth between these two uses of human without having a fallacious argument. So, for example, one could not argue even a zygote, a very early stage fetus, is genetically human. It doesn't automatically follow that the zygote has full moral standing. So this is a similar point about common uses of the term human in the biomedical, bioethical literature and the and uses of the term person. Okay. Now we're going to switch to a somewhat more tangible topic, uh, and that's the issue of simply defining when a person dies. So questions 4, 5, and 6 concern this. So question 4 concerns the section entitled Defining Death that starts on page 44. This is relevant to moral standing because living persons or humans have more rights than dead ones do. Hence, we all possess full moral standing when we are alive, and we need to know when we transition to being deceased. So read the section, the somatic or circulatory definition of death. When on this view does a person die? So let's just do that one first if you drop down below here. So the basic idea behind the somatic or circulatory theory is that a body is essentially an integrated set of functions that enable the body to live as a single organism. When these functions irreversibly break down, the person is dead. Significant functions on this view include circulation of blood and respiration. Hence, heart and lung failure are paradigm cases of death on this view. Okay, let's look at part B here. Is a person whose heart stops beating but is successfully resuscitated dead on this view? And the answer is no, because the definition of death includes this notion of irreversibility. So I say here, irreversibility is a key concept on this view. Hence, the person whose heart is resuscitated never died, because their heart did not stop beating permanently, their blood did not stop circulating permanently. So technically, such a person is not brought back from the dead. On this view, they never died to begin with. They just suffered heart failure. All right, now question C says summarize the controversy over transplanted baby hearts in 2 or 3 sections. 3 sentences, sorry. So here we're gonna look at a case involving the transplantation of baby hearts that involves an application of the circulatory or somatic theory of death. So here's the controversy. This is what I wrote in C on the screen. In Denver, there were 3 babies who were terminally ill and whose hearts had stopped beating. Their hearts were planted into non-terminally ill babies, and the heart's functioned fine. The issue is that since the heart was made to function again in another baby's body, it could have been made to function again in the original owner baby's body. Hence, the baby should not have been considered dead to begin with. This causes the concern that if one has a viable organ, one could be treated as if one were dead, even when one is not yet. So you could tell the motive was good. They were trying to save the lives of 3 babies who could survive with the heart transplants, and the babies, unfortunately, who they were taking the hearts from, they were terminally ill. They were going to become deceased or die anyway. So the idea is, why not use their hearts to save three other children? That's what was done. Um, but yeah, it raises a profound issue. Is it okay to take someone's organs before they're actually dead? So that's where that moral dilemma lies, and it arises because of the circulatory definition of death. And that leads us to D. What's the practical issue, practical problem involved with defining death this way? And that is this. The practical problem is that if we wait to declare a person dead when organs like the heart can no longer function, then lots of potential organ donations will be lost. So these definitions matter. They have practical, on-the-ground implications for things like organ transplants. All right, moving on to question 5. I asked you to read the whole brain definition of death and the higher brain definition. And then the questions just ask you to kind of explain each. That's parts A and B. And then C says, describe a scenario in which the somatic definition of death from question 4 would give a different result than the whole brain definition. All right, so let's kind of march through this. So according to the whole brain definition of death, a person is dead when their entire brain ceases to function. This includes the brainstem, which does not support consciousness or reason or any of the traits we consider essential to having a personality, or in that sense, being a person. The higher brain definition entails a person is dead when they lose the higher functions, and these are of the brain, and these are the functions that support consciousness in various forms of reasoning and perception. Now, question C asks us to describe a situation in which the circulatory or somatic definition of death gives a different result than the whole brain theory. Okay. So in a case of extreme cardiac arrest that takes out a person's circulatory system, the person would die quicker according to the somatic or circulatory theory than they would according to the brain death theory, since it would take a while for the brain to shut down even after the blood has stopped flowing. And again, this is important because it can affect things such as organ donation, and it can also affect how we view different cases of people in a vegetative state. Let's say we expect them to never return because the entire higher brain has shut down. So at least according to the higher brain theory, that person is deceased, so it would be okay to kind of pull the plug, so to speak. But you might get a different result on these other theories of when death occurs. Okay, final question. Read the section entitled Abortion. Symmetry between definition of death and abortion. The basic idea here is that insight on when one dies may shed some light on when a human life in the moral sense begins. So when do we get full moral standing? If the higher, question A says, 6A says, if the higher brain view of death is correct, this implies that a human in the moral sense is present when higher brain function begins. When does that occur in utero? If you jump down, the higher functions of the brain start to come online in utero at around the 24th week. So the strategy here is to say, okay, if we're defining death as the loss of a function, then we're defining the beginning of a morally significant human life as when those functions begin. So the higher functions of the brain they start to activate, develop around the 24th week. So that would imply that abortions after the 24th week would be much harder to justify than any time before, and may even be unjustifiable, just except maybe to save the life of the mother or something like that. Again, we'll go into abortion deeper later. So this is just, but I think we can assume that an important component of that debate involves the moral status of the fetus. When does it possess full moral standing? This theory implies that that would occur at the 24th week. Okay. Part B is if the whole brain definition of death is correct, when would a fetus gain full moral standing? And the textbook notes that the answer to this question is a little vague, as it is unclear when the whole brain is functioning to sufficiently integrate bodily processes. Levels of integration are a matter of degree. So the reason the brain's supposed to be the most important organ on this view is that it coordinates all the functions of the body. So when the brain is functioning as it should, as long as everything else has gone okay as well, you have a fully integrated organism. But again, levels of integration are a matter of degree, so it's not quite clear when enough integration of bodily processes will have been achieved to consider the fetus an individual living human being in the moral sense. And then question C, if the somatic or circulatory definition of death is correct, when would a fetus gain full moral standing? The answer to this question is also vague, as though the heart starts to pump early on. Full circulatory integration occurs around the 24th week. And again, you have varying levels of integration leading up to that week. All right, so hopefully you've hung in here and picked up a pretty good understanding of these notions. Uh, please proceed at this point to the discussion board where you'll be asked to apply some of these distinctions. And if you find this stuff confusing and want to talk through it more, we can do an office hour. That can be done on Zoom as well. So please don't be afraid to take that option and reach out for even more help. All right. Have a good week.